My son, Bernard, and his wife, Linda, didn't even call ahead. They simply showed up, barged through my front door, as if they were the landlords inspecting a property, and sat down at the head of my kitchen table with that expression I knew all too well. Bernard didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask about his father's memory. He went straight for the throat. "Mom," he said, leaning over my table, "we need to talk about your assets. We've been thinking you're too old to manage $3,000 a month. Since we're family and we've supported you emotionally, we believe it's only fair that we step in. We want 50%. Before we find out what happened, please subscribe to the channel and let us know which city you are listening from in the comments." I sat in my kitchen in Santa Fe, wrapping my hands around a warm ceramic mug. The morning sun was just coming over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting the desert floor in shades of orange and sage. This was my favorite time of day. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I worked hard for this house. Every beam, every tile, and every quiet morning was bought with swollen ankles and sleepless nights working as a registered nurse. I cleaned bedpans. I held the hands of the dying. And I saved every dime I could so that my 70s would look exactly like this. Peaceful. But peace, I have learned, is fragile. I heard the gravel crunch before I saw them. It wasn't the slow, respectful roll of a neighbor or the mail carrier. It was an aggressive sound, tires biting into the stones, too hard, too fast. I didn't even have to look out the window to know who it was, but I did anyway. I stood up slowly, my knees popping just a little, a reminder of those long shifts, and walked to the window that faces the driveway. A silver sedan had pulled up, parking crookedly, half on the driveway and half on my xeriscaped garden. It was my son, Bernard, and his wife, Linda. I didn't rush to the door. I stayed behind the curtain for a moment, just watching. You learn a lot about people when they think no one is looking. In my nursing days, I learned to diagnose a patient the moment they walked through the door just by looking at their shoes, their skin, and the way they held themselves. I did the same thing now with my own family. Linda got out of the passenger side first. She slammed the door. She was wearing a pair of sunglasses that looked expensive and a brand new leather handbag slung over her shoulder. It was one of those bags with the logo stamped all over it, the kind that screams money. But then my eyes drifted to the car. The silver sedan was filthy. There was a nasty dent in the rear bumper that had started to rust, and the front tire looked dangerously low on air. That was the tell. That was the contradiction. You don't buy a $2,000 handbag when you can't afford to fix the car that gets you to work. It was a symptom of a disease I had seen in them for years, financial rot. They looked polished on the surface, but underneath, things were falling apart. I took a deep breath, fortified myself with one last sip of coffee, and unlocked the front door. I didn't even get the chance to turn the handle fully before the door was pushed open from the outside. "Mom, are you home?" Bernard's voice boomed through the entryway. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked right past me, bringing a gust of hot desert air and the smell of stale cigarette smoke with him. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask about my arthritis or my garden. He just marched into the kitchen like he was the one paying the electric bill. Linda followed him, her heels clicking loudly on my tile floor. She gave me a tight, thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Shalia," she said, her voice dripping with a fake sweetness that made my teeth ache. She looked around the living room, her eyes lingering on the antique cabinet in the corner and the flat-screen TV I had treated myself to last Christmas. She wasn't looking at them with admiration. She was looking at them like an appraiser at an auction. She was calculating what they were worth. "Coffee," I offered, keeping my voice neutral. I walked back to the counter, creating a physical barrier between us. "No time," Bernard said. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table. My husband's chair. My husband has been gone for 5 years, and nobody sits in that chair but me. Bernard sat down heavily, spreading his arms out on the table, claiming the space. It was a power move. He wanted to show me he was the man of the house, even though he hadn't hammered a single nail to build it. I remained standing. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms over my chest. I wasn't going to sit down and be lectured in my own kitchen. To what do I owe the pleasure? I asked. You didn't call. We didn't want to worry you over the phone, Linda said, taking the seat next to him. She placed that expensive bag on the table right on top of my placemats. We wanted to do this face to face. Because we care. Care, I repeated. The word tasted sour. They visited twice a year, usually when they needed something. Last time, it was a loan for a vet bill for a dog I had never seen. The time before that, it was help with a security deposit. They never stayed long enough to finish a cup of tea, and they never asked me a single question about my life. Bernard drummed his fingers on the table. He looked older than his 45 years. His face was puffy, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who wasn't sleeping, a man running from something. Mom, look, Bernard started, his voice dropping an octave to sound serious and authoritative. We've been doing a lot of talking, Linda and me. We've been worried about you. I'm fine, Bernard. My doctor says I have the heart of a 50-year-old. I said, Not your health, Mom. He interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. Your situation. Living out here all alone. Managing this big house. Handling all the bills. It's too much for one person, especially at your age. I tightened my grip on my own elbows. I manage just fine. I've managed the bills since before you were born. Bernard exchanged a look with Linda. It was a rehearsed look. They had practiced this conversation in the car. They had a script, and they were sticking to it. That's just it, Shalia, Linda chimed in. You think you're managing, but things slip through the cracks as we get older. It's natural. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protected from what? I asked. Bernard leaned forward. The air in the kitchen felt suddenly very small, very tight. The peaceful morning I had enjoyed 5 minutes ago felt like a distant memory. Mom, we need to have a serious talk about your future, Bernard said, his eyes locking onto mine. We don't think you can handle your assets anymore. We think it's time you let us take over, before you lose everything. I looked at him. I looked at the dented car in the driveway, and then back at his desperate eyes. He wasn't here to save me. He was drowning, and he was looking for a life raft. I didn't scream. I didn't get angry. I just stared at him, my face calm, my mind sharp. Is that so? I said softly. They thought they were the predators entering the hen house. They had no idea they had just walked into the lion's den. Lose everything. Those 2 words hung in the air between us like a bad smell. Bernard said them with such gravity, such rehearsed concern, that if I hadn't known him better, I might have actually been frightened. He leaned back in his father's chair, crossing his arms, waiting for me to panic. He was waiting for the frail, confused old woman he wanted me to be, but I wasn't confused. I knew exactly where every cent of my money was. I balanced my checkbook down to the penny every Sunday evening after 60 minutes. My property taxes were paid a month early, and my retirement fund, my nest egg as Bernard liked to call it, was sitting safely in a diversified portfolio that I checked online every Tuesday. Lose everything? I repeated, keeping my voice steady. That's a very dramatic thing to say. Bernard, my bills are paid. The house is paid for. I have food in the fridge. It's not about the bills, Mom. Bernard sighed, rubbing his temples as if explaining this to me was giving him a migraine. It's about management. The economy is shifting. Inflation is eating away at cash savings. If you aren't moving your money, you're losing it. And let's be honest, you aren't exactly a Wall Street broker. I did well enough to put you through college. I reminded him. And I did well enough to retire at 65 without owing anyone a dime. Linda chimed in then, her voice high and grating. That was a different time. Shalia, things are more complicated now. There are digital scams targeting seniors every day. We just read an article about a woman in Albuquerque who lost her entire pension to a phone scammer. We don't want that to happen to you. So, to prevent me from giving my money to a stranger, you want me to give it to you? I asked. Not give, Bernard corrected quickly. Manage. We want to manage it for you. He unzipped a leather portfolio he had brought in with him. He didn't look at me while he did it. He looked at his hands. He pulled out a crisp, thick document and slid it across the polished oak table. It stopped right next to Linda's expensive handbag. I didn't pick it up immediately. I just looked at the header. Durable power of attorney. The audacity of it took my breath away for a second. They weren't asking for a loan this time. They weren't asking for a handout. They were asking for the keys to the kingdom. They wanted legal authority to sign my checks, sell my property, and access my accounts. They wanted to declare me incompetent without saying the word. This would just make things easier, Bernard said, tapping the paper. It gives me the authority to handle your affairs, so you don't have to stress about it. You can just relax. Enjoy your golden years. I am enjoying my golden years, I said. I enjoy them because I have $3,000 a month coming in from my pension, and I decide where every dollar goes. $3,000 a month, Bernard murmured, almost to himself. See, that's exactly it. That's $36,000 a year just sitting in a checking account. Mom, that is dead capital. It's doing nothing. It pays for my heating. It pays for my groceries. It pays for my peace of mind, I said. It could be doing so much more, Bernard said, his eyes finally lighting up with the real reason he was here. The mask of concern slipped, and the desperation poked through. Mom, Linda and I have an opportunity. A real one. A once-in-a-lifetime thing. Here it comes, I thought. There's a franchise opening up, he said, leaning forward, his hands animating the air. A logistics company. Delivery routes. It's guaranteed income, Mom. Everyone orders online now. Delivery is the future. But the buy-in window closes on Friday. If we don't put the capital down now, we lose the territory. And you don't have the capital, I stated. It wasn't a question. We have some of it. Linda lied. I knew she was lying because she started picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. We just need a bridge. If you sign this power of attorney, Bernard can leverage your pension as proof of income to secure the business loan. We wouldn't even have to touch your actual cash. It's just on paper. Leverage, I said. You want to use my retirement as collateral for a delivery route. It's an investment. Bernard insisted, his face turning red. We're trying to build something here. We're trying to advance our lives. You're sitting here in this big empty house with 3 bedrooms you don't even use, holding on to cash you don't even need, while we're struggling to get ahead. It's not fair, Mom. It's really not. Linda looked around the room again, her gaze landing on my china cabinet. He's right, Shalia. Look at this place. It's a museum. You have service for 12 in that cabinet. When was the last time you had 12 people over? You're holding on to things that should be used to help the family. You don't need all this. Her words felt like a slap. That china was a wedding gift from my mother. I used it every Christmas. But to them, it wasn't a memory. It was just an asset I was selfishly hoarding. They looked at my life, my carefully built, quiet, comfortable life, and they didn't see a home. They saw a resource to be mined. I looked at the document again. If I signed that, Bernard could legally take a loan out against my house. He could drain my savings to buy his delivery route. And when the business failed, which it would, because Bernard had never finished anything he started in his life, the bank wouldn't come after him. They would come after me. They would take my home. I looked at my son. I remembered him as a little boy, scraping his knee and running to me for a bandage. I remembered paying for his first car, a Ford Escort, which he totaled 3 months later. I remembered the bail money when he got into a bar fight in his 20s. I remembered the loans for rent, for furniture, for investments that never panned out. I had always given it. I had always been the soft place for him to land. But looking at him now, a grown man of 45, demanding control of the money I scrubbed floors to earn, something inside me hardened. He didn't see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as an obstacle. He saw me as a bank vault that was taking too long to open. He actually believed he was entitled to this. That was the scariest part. He truly believed that my money was his money, just waiting for him to claim it. He thought that because I was old, I didn't have dreams or needs anymore. He thought I was just waiting to die. So why not give him the inheritance now? You want me to sign this today? I asked, keeping my face completely blank. Ideally, yes, Bernard said, pushing a pen toward me. We can get it notarized at the bank down the street. Then I can get the loan approved by tomorrow morning. And if I don't, Bernard's jaw tightened. Mom, don't be difficult. We're trying to help you. If you don't do this, you're basically saying you don't care if we succeed or fail. You're choosing your china plates over your own son. It's for your own good, Shalia, Linda added, her voice dropping to a whisper. Bernard is so stressed. If he can't get this business going, I don't know what we'll do. We might have to move in here with you to save money. There it was. The threat. If I didn't give them the money, they would invade my sanctuary. They would bring their chaos, their debt, and their noise into my quiet home. They were cornering me. They thought they had checkmated the old widow. I looked at the pen. I looked at the document. And then I looked at the clock on the wall. It was time. I wasn't scared. I was disgusted. And when a nurse sees an infection, she doesn't panic. She prepares to cut it out. I see, I said, my voice calm, betraying nothing of the storm raging in my chest. You make a very compelling case, Bernard. I didn't reach for the pen. I didn't reach for the document. But before we discuss legal documents, I said, I have something I want to show you too. I didn't reach for the folder immediately. Not yet. A good nurse knows that you don't administer the medicine until you are absolutely sure of the diagnosis. I needed them to say it. I needed them to admit exactly why they were sitting in my kitchen, sweating through their clothes, demanding the life savings I had spent 40 years accumulating. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. It had gone cold, but I didn't wince. I set the mug down with a soft clink on the table. I softened my shoulders. I let my face relax, dropping the stern look I had held since they walked in. I decided to give them exactly what they wanted, a confused, concerned mother who just wanted to help her children. If I sign this, I asked quietly, looking down at the power of attorney document, how exactly will you help me? Walk me through it, Bernard. I'm an old woman. I don't understand these modern finances. The tension in the room broke instantly. You could practically hear the air hiss out of them. They thought they had won. They thought the resistance was over, and now it was just a matter of logistics. Bernard sat up straighter, his chest puffing out. Linda stopped picking at her sleeve and actually smiled, a real smile this time, fueled by greed. It's simple, Mom, Bernard said, his voice taking on that smooth salesman quality again. We take over the burden. We consolidate your accounts. We put the money into high-yield avenues. You won't have to worry about banking hours or tax forms. We'll pay your bills from the account, give you a stipend for groceries. A stipend? I interrupted gently. Like an allowance? Think of it as a budget, Linda corrected quickly, to make sure you don't overspend. And the rest? I asked. The money you use for this logistics business. What happens if the business doesn't work out? It will work out, Bernard insisted. It has to. But if it doesn't, I pressed, keeping my voice soft, almost fearful. What happens to me? Bernard sighed, frustration creeping back in. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. Mom, you're focusing on the negative. You have to spend money to make money. Look, we're doing this for the family. For the legacy. I looked at him. Is this really about legacy, Bernard? Or is it about right now? I let the silence stretch. I learned a long time ago that if you stay quiet long enough, people will fill the silence with the truth, just to stop the awkwardness. Bernard looked at Linda. Linda looked at the floor. We're behind, Mom. Bernard mumbled. What was that? I asked. We're behind, he snapped, his facade cracking. Okay, is that what you want to hear? We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank is sending letters. This delivery route is the only way out. If we don't come up with the buy-in money by Friday, we're going to lose the house. We're going to lose the cars. We maxed out the credit cards trying to keep up appearances. Linda added, her voice shrill. The kids need things, Shalia. You know how it is. We couldn't just let them suffer because the economy is bad. I looked at her designer bag sitting on my table. I thought about the things the kids needed. Brand new iPhones, designer sneakers. I hadn't seen my grandchildren in 6 months because they were too busy with travel sports leagues that cost thousands of dollars a season. So I said slowly, summarizing their confession, you aren't here to manage my money because I'm incompetent. You're here because you're broke. You want to use my pension to pay your mortgage and gamble on a new business because you spent all your own money. We didn't spend it. Bernard argued weakly. Life is expensive. You don't understand. You've been sitting in this paid-off house for 20 years. You don't know what it's like out there. I know that I never spent money I didn't have. I said, it's a loan, Shalia. Linda cried out, we just need a bridge. Once the business takes off, we'll pay you back with interest. We promise. We just need you to sign the paper. So the bank sees we have assets. There it was. The full truth. They didn't want to protect me. They wanted to consume me to save themselves. They were willing to risk my home to save theirs. My phone was sitting face down on the table next to my coffee mug. I reached out and tapped the screen. It looked like I was just checking the time or maybe ignoring a notification. But I wasn't. I had opened the voice memo app the moment I went to the window to watch them pull in. I had pressed record right before I unlocked the front door. I tapped stop and save. I had it all. The threats, the admission of debt, the coercion. In the state of New Mexico, only one person needs to know a conversation is being recorded for it to be legal. And that person was me. I see, I said, so it's desperation. It's strategy, Bernard corrected, though he looked defeated. So, will you sign? Please, Mom. Don't let us drown. I looked at my son. I saw the fear in his eyes, but I also saw the entitlement. He wasn't asking for help. He was demanding a sacrifice. He expected me to set myself on fire to keep him warm. I expected this might happen one day, I said, my voice hardening. The soft mother was gone. The nurse was back. I've watched how you live, Bernard. I've watched you buy cars you couldn't afford and take vacations on credit cards. I knew this day would come. I pushed the chair back and stood up. My legs felt strong. I have something prepared for this exact conversation. I said. Bernard's eyes lit up. He sat forward, a hopeful grin spreading across his face. He thought I meant a checkbook. He thought I meant a secret stash of cash I kept in a coffee can. He thought I was going to fix it, just like I fixed his scraped knees when he was 6. You do? He asked, breathless. Mom, thank you. You won't regret this. I swear. Wait right there, I said. I turned my back on them and walked toward the built-in bookshelf in the living room. It was filled with photo albums and nursing textbooks. But on the third shelf, tucked between a Bible and a dictionary, was a slim black folder. It wasn't dusty. I handled it often. I updated it often. I pulled it off the shelf. It felt heavy in my hand, not because of the paper inside, but because of the weight of the truth it held. I turned back to face them. Bernard and Linda were exchanging looks of relief. Linda was actually reaching for her purse, probably to check Zillow for houses they could buy once their business took off. They looked like they had just won the lottery. I walked back to the table, holding the black folder against my chest. I didn't sit down. I stood over them, looking down at the top of my son's balding head. I think this answers your question, I said. I placed the black folder on the table, right on top of their power of attorney document. Bernard reached for it, his hands shaking with excitement. He thought he was opening the door to his future. He had no idea he was opening a tomb. Bernard's hands were trembling, but not from fear, not yet. They were trembling with anticipation. He flipped the cover of the black folder open, his eyes eager, expecting to see a check, a bank transfer form, or maybe the deed to the house signed over to him. He was ready to be saved. He was ready to have his slate wiped clean by his mother, just like always. But there was no check inside. There was no deed. There was only a single laminated spreadsheet printed in landscape mode, with rows and columns as neat and orderly as a patient's medical chart. Behind it sat a stack of photocopied receipts, bank statements, and legal notices, all organized by date. The smile slid off Bernard's face. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in slow motion. His brow furrowed. He squinted at the paper. He turned the page over, looking for the real document, then looked back at the spreadsheet. What is this? He asked, his voice flat. Mom, what is this? Read it, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Read the title, Bernard. He looked down. The Family Debt Ledger, 1995 to present. He read aloud. He looked up at me, confused. I don't understand. What is this? It's an accounting, I said. You came here talking about finances. You came here talking about fairness. And who owes who? So, I decided we should look at the numbers. The real numbers. Linda leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the columns. I watched her face change as she realized her name was on the list too. Start at the top. I instructed. Date, June 12th, 1998. Bernard's eyes scanned the first line. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, this is ancient history. I was 20 years old. Read the item, Bernard. He sighed, loud and dramatic. Bail money and legal fees. $2,500. That was for the misunderstanding at the bar. I reminded him. You called me at 3 a.m. You were crying. You said if I didn't get you out, you'd lose your job. You promised to pay me back with your next 3 paychecks. Do you see a repayment date in the next column? The column 4 date repaid was blank. I was a kid, he muttered. Keep going, I said. Jump to 2005. The Ford Explorer. He didn't want to read it, so I said it for him. October 2005. Loan for vehicle purchase. $8,000. You told me the bank wouldn't approve you because you had just switched jobs. You said it was a short-term loan until your bonus came in. I wrote the check directly to the dealership. I needed a car to get to work. Bernard snapped. What did you want me to do, walk? I wanted you to keep your word. I said simply, but that bonus never came, did it? Or maybe it did. and it went somewhere else. This is petty, Linda spat out, straightening up and pulling away from the table. Shalia, this is incredibly petty. Keeping a scorecard on your own family? Who does that? A woman who wants to protect her retirement. I answered. Look at 2015. Linda, that one is for you. Linda froze. She looked down at the paper. Emergency dental work. I read from memory. $4,000. Linda's hand instinctively went to her mouth. I was in pain. It was an emergency. It was veneers, Linda. I corrected her. Cosmetic veneers. You told me it was a root canal and a crown. You told me you were in agony. But I saw the bill. I saw the dentist's notes. I paid it anyway because I didn't want to embarrass you. But don't call it an emergency. Call it what it was, vanity on my dime. The room was deadly quiet now. The air conditioner hummed, sounding like a jet engine in the silence. They were flipping through the pages now, seeing the receipts attached to the back. Every time they had asked for gas money, every unexpected bill I covered, every time I bought the grandkids' school clothes because Bernard said things were tight. It was all there. Every single dollar. Why? Bernard whispered. He looked hurt. He actually looked betrayed. Why did you keep all this? Were you just waiting to throw it in our faces? I kept it because I kept hoping. I said, I hoped one day you would come to me with a check, even for $50, and say, Here, Mom, I'm starting to pay you back. I kept it because I needed to know if I was raising a man or a leech. And the ledger doesn't lie, Bernard. Okay, fine. Bernard slammed the folder shut. So we owe you some money. We'll add it to the business plan. When the delivery route takes off, we'll pay you back double. Okay? Is that what you want to hear? We'll pay you back double. You can't pay me back, I said, because there is no business plan. And you weren't working overtime last week. I reached over and flipped the folder back open. I turned past the spreadsheet to the very back section. There were 4 glossy photographs clipped to the back cover. Bernard's face went from red to a ghostly white in a split second. The photos were high quality. I had paid a good professional for them. The first one showed Bernard walking into the Golden Sand Casino. The timestamp in the corner read, Tuesday, 2 p.m. The second photo showed him at a blackjack table, a stack of chips in front of him. He looked happy in the photo, happier than I had seen him in years. He had a drink in his hand. The third photo showed him at the ATM inside the casino, his head in his hands, looking devastated. Tuesday, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. You told Linda you were pulling a double shift at the warehouse. You told me you were meeting with potential investors for this delivery route. But you were at the Golden Sand, Bernard, and you weren't winning. Linda turned to look at him. Her eyes were wide. Bernard, you said you were at work. You said the overtime check was coming next week. He's lying to you too, Linda, I said calmly. There is no delivery route franchise. There is no business opportunity. He's trying to get my pension money to pay off a gambling debt before the sharks come for his kneecaps. Isn't that right, Bernard? Bernard couldn't speak. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just stared at the photo of himself at the ATM. The moment his world had obviously crumbled. I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago. I explained. Because a mother knows when her son is in trouble. I wanted to believe you were just bad with money. I wanted to believe it was just the economy. But I needed to know the truth before I let you destroy my life along with yours. I reached out and tapped the bottom of the spreadsheet, right where the numbers were tallied up in bold red ink. Look at the number, Bernard. He wouldn't look. So I read it for him. $148,000. I said, that is the total of every loan, every bailout, every emergency gift, and the interest that would have accrued if I had kept that money in my retirement fund instead of giving it to you. I leaned back, crossing my arms. I felt a cold, hard strength in my chest. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was their creditor, and they were in default. You came here asking for 50% of my pension, I said, looking him dead in the eye. You said it was only fair. You said I have so much money and you have nothing. I pointed a shaking finger at the red number. You asked for your inheritance early? You already got it. You spent it on bail, cars, teeth, and blackjack. You spent it all, Bernard. You have drained $148,000 from this family. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile you give when you finally close a book you've been reading for too long. You don't get 50%, I said. You don't get a stipend. And you certainly don't get a power of attorney. By my calculations, you owe me, and until that balance is paid in full, the Bank of Mom is permanently closed. The silence in the kitchen didn't last long. It shattered the moment the reality of that red number, $148,000, sank into my son's brain. Linda was the first to react, but not with anger. She went completely pale, the color draining from her face like water down a drain. She looked at the photos of the casino, then at Bernard, and then back at the spreadsheet. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She realized that the business trip Bernard took last week, the one that required him to drain their joint savings account, wasn't a business trip at all. She looked sick, like she might actually throw up on my oak table. Bernard, she whispered, her voice trembling. You said you were meeting investors. Bernard didn't answer her. He was staring at the paper, his face twisting into a knot of pure, unadulterated rage. He wasn't looking at me like a son looks at his mother. He was looking at me like an enemy combatant. Suddenly, he lunged across the table. He grabbed the spreadsheet and the photos in one violent motion. His chair screeched against the floor tiles as he stood up. He crumpled the papers in his fist, crushing the evidence of his failures, and then ripped them right down the middle. This is garbage, he shouted, throwing the torn pieces onto the floor. This is absolute garbage. You think you can just print out lies and throw them in my face. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked at the torn paper on the floor, as if destroying the physical copy would somehow erase the debt. He pointed a finger at me, shaking with adrenaline. You have no right, he spat. You have no right to snoop on me. Who do you think you are? I didn't flinch. I didn't move to pick up the papers. I just watched him, calm and steady. Go ahead, Bernard, I said, my voice barely raised above a conversational tone. Tear them into confetti if it makes you feel better. Burn them in the sink if you want. I will, he yelled. It won't change anything, I continued. Those are just photocopies. I have the originals, and so does my lawyer. Bernard froze. His hand, halfway to grabbing the papers again, stopped in midair. Your lawyer? He choked out. Mr. Henderson, I said. You remember him. He handled your father's estate. I went to see him yesterday morning. We sat down for 2 hours. I showed him the ledger. I showed him the photos. And I showed him the bank statements proving where the money went. I took a slow breath. We notarized the ledger. Bernard, it's attached to my will now as a legal addendum. It's officially recorded as an advance on inheritance. So even if I died right now, in this chair, you wouldn't get a penny. The debt is documented. The estate has already been paid out to you, one bad loan at a time. Bernard stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The fight was draining out of him, replaced by panic. But then, as narcissists often do, he tried to flip the script. He couldn't attack the facts, so he decided to attack me. You're sick, he stammered, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You hired a private investigator to follow your own son? Do you know how insane that sounds? You're paranoid, Mom. You've lost it. He turned to Linda, looking for an ally. See? I told you. She was getting old. This is dementia, Linda. This is paranoia. She's imagining enemies everywhere. She's sabotaging us because she's lonely and bitter. I'm not the one gambling at the Golden Sand at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, I said. That was one time. Bernard screamed. I went in to use the restroom and played a few hands. You're twisting everything. You're trying to ruin me because you can't stand to see me independent. Independent. I asked, you are 45 years old and asking your mother to pay your mortgage. I am trying to build a future, he shouted, his face turning purple. And you're sneaking around, spying on texts, hiring spies. It's disgusting. It's a betrayal of this family. How can you sleep at night knowing you're stalking your own children? He was good at it. I'll give him that. He almost sounded convincing. He was playing the victim with an Oscar-worthy performance, trying to make me feel small, trying to make me feel like the bad guy for uncovering his lies. But I had one page left in the folder. I hadn't taken it out yet. I had hoped I wouldn't have to. I had hoped the numbers would be enough. But he was calling me paranoid. He was calling me a liar. I didn't want to show you this. I said quietly. I really didn't. It breaks my heart, Bernard. But if you think I'm paranoid, you need to read this. I pulled the final sheet from the black folder. It was a screenshot of a text message thread. I slid it across the table, careful to avoid the torn pieces of the spreadsheet. November 24th, I said, Thanksgiving Day. You were both here. You ate my turkey. You drank my wine. And while I was in the kitchen doing the dishes, you were texting each other from the living room sofa. Bernard looked at the paper. He recognized the interface. It was his own phone screen. Read it, I said. He didn't want to. He looked away. Read it, I commanded, my voice finally cracking like a whip. He looked down. Linda leaned in, her eyes widening as she recognized her own words. I recited them. I didn't need to look at the paper. I had memorized them. They were burned into my brain. Bernard sent. She's taking forever with the pie. I just want to get out of here. I paused. And then you replied, Linda, just smile and eat it. We need to stay on her good side if we want that loan next month. She's a soft target if we play nice. Linda gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. And then you, Bernard, I continued, looking right at my son. You replied, I know. She's so desperate for company, she'll pay anything. Just gotta tolerate the stingy old hag for another hour. The words hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Stingy old hag. Soft target. I saw that pop up on your iPad. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You left it unlocked on the coffee table when you went to the bathroom. I didn't spy. You left your hate right there for me to see. I looked at Linda. A soft target. That's what I am to you. Not a mother-in-law. Not a grandmother. A target. I looked at Bernard. And a stingy old hag. The woman who paid for your college. The woman who paid for your lawyer. The woman who fed you Thanksgiving dinner while you plotted how to get more money out of her. Bernard slumped into his chair. The anger was gone. The gaslighting was gone. You can argue with a spreadsheet. You can explain away a photo, but you cannot explain away your own cruel words written in black and white. He looked down at his hands. He looked like a deflated balloon. Mom, he croaked, his voice barely audible. We were just venting. We didn't mean it. You meant every word, I said. You meant it because you think I'm stupid. You think because I'm old, I'm blind. You think because I'm alone, I'm weak. I stood up straight, smoothing down the front of my blouse. Well, the soft target just grew a spine. Bernard. The room went deadly silent. There was no sound of traffic outside, no humming of the fridge, just the sound of two people realizing that they had underestimated the one person they needed the most. They had no defense. The evidence wasn't just overwhelming. It was emotional proof that they didn't love me. They were just using me. And now, the user fee was due. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a vase. I simply looked at the digital clock on the microwave. It read 10:14 a.m. You have 5 minutes, I said. Bernard blinked, his mouth still slightly open from the shock of reading his own nasty text messages. What? You have 5 minutes to remove yourselves, your vehicle, and your sense of entitlement from my property. I said, if you are still here at 10:19, I will call Sheriff Martinez. I have his direct line on the fridge. I'm sure he'd be interested to see the documents regarding elder financial abuse I have in this folder. You wouldn't, Bernard scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. He stood up, trying to regain some height, some dominance. You wouldn't call the cops on your own son. You're bluffing. You're just emotional right now. I am not emotional, Bernard. I am practical. I corrected him. And you aren't a son right now. You're a trespasser who just tried to swindle me out of my livelihood. I walked over to the landline mounted on the kitchen wall. I lifted the receiver. The dial tone buzzed loudly in the silent room, a steady, mechanical hum that sounded like a warning. That sound snapped them back to reality. They realized the game was over. The soft target had become a concrete wall. Linda, seeing that Bernard's aggression wasn't working, decided to switch tactics one last time. Her face crumpled. It was a transformation I had seen many times before, the sudden onset of victimhood. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing a few tears to spill onto her cheeks. Shalia, please, she sobbed, reaching out a hand toward me, but stopping short of touching me. You can't do this. We're family. If we don't get that money, we really will lose the house. We'll be on the street. Do you want that? Do you want your grandchildren to be homeless? Don't bring the grandchildren into this, I said sharply. You haven't brought them to see me in 6 months. You told me they were too busy for Christmas. Now suddenly they are my responsibility. We have nowhere to go. Linda wailed, the volume rising as she tried to guilt-trip me into submission. We're drowning, Shalia. We have nothing. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I looked at the tears that didn't quite make her eyes red. I looked at the way she was checking my reaction, waiting to see if I would crack. Then I looked at the table. You say you have nothing, I said, pointing to the leather handbag sitting next to the black folder. But that bag is a Louis Vuitton. I know what they cost because I saw the receipt in your trash last Christmas when I came over to help you clean. That bag cost $2,400. Linda's hand flew to the strap of the bag, clutching it defensively. That was a gift, she stammered. It was bought with a credit card that Bernard asked me to help pay off 3 months later. I said, you aren't homeless, Linda. You're living above your means. If you need money for your mortgage, I suggest you start selling things. Start with the bag. Then sell the second car. Then sell the golf clubs Bernard keeps in the trunk. That is none of your business. Bernard shouted, stepping between me and his wife. It became my business the moment you walked into my kitchen and demanded half of my pension. I replied, now it is 10:17. You have 2 minutes. I started pressing the first digit on the phone. 9. Bernard's face turned a dark, ugly shade of red. He looked at the phone in my hand, then at the folder on the table, and finally at the door. He realized he had lost. There was no check coming. There was no power of attorney. There was only the humiliating truth that he had underestimated his mother. Fine, he screamed. Fine. Keep your money. Die alone in this big empty house. See if we care. Don't expect us to visit when you're sick. Don't expect us to come to the funeral. I don't expect anything from you anymore, Bernard, I said calmly. That is the freedom you just gave me. He grabbed his keys off the counter with such force that he knocked over the salt shaker. He didn't pick it up. He grabbed Linda by the arm, a little too roughly, and pulled her toward the door. Let's go, he snarled at her. She's crazy. She's gone senile. We don't need her. Linda grabbed her designer bag, clutching it to her chest like a life preserver, and scrambled after him. She shot me one last look, not of remorse, but of pure venom. You're a selfish old woman, she hissed as she passed me. And you, I said, are a trespasser. Get out. They stormed through the living room. The front door flew open, letting in a blinding square of desert sunlight, and then slam. The sound of the door slamming shook the pictures on the wall. It vibrated through the floorboards and up through the soles of my feet. I didn't move. I stood by the phone, listening. I heard the car doors slam. I heard the engine of the silver sedan rev aggressively. I heard the tires spin in the gravel, throwing rocks against my fence as they peeled out of the driveway and sped down the road. And then silence. The heavy, golden silence rushed back into the room to fill the space they had vacated. I hung up the phone. I walked over to the front door and turned the deadbolt. Click. Then I engaged the chain lock. Slide. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door for a moment. I waited for the tears. I waited for the crushing weight of motherly guilt to collapse my lungs. I waited for the voice in my head to tell me I was a bad mother, that I should have helped them, that I should have given them just a little bit more. But the tears didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It felt like a band of iron that had been wrapped around my ribs for 20 years had suddenly snapped. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like coffee and sage and freedom. I wasn't sad. I wasn't guilty. I was relieved. I walked back into the kitchen. The black folder was still on the table, sitting there like a shield that had done its job. I picked it up. I didn't need to look at it again. I walked over to the trash can, the one under the sink. I hesitated for a second. Then I shook my head. No, I wouldn't throw it away. I would keep it, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. A reminder that I was not a soft target. I put the folder back on the shelf, right between the Bible and the dictionary. Then I picked up the salt shaker Bernard had knocked over. I wiped up the spilled salt with a damp cloth. I washed my coffee mug. I dried it and put it away in the cupboard. My house was clean. My money was safe. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring with a crisis. I had cut the cord. I walked to the window and looked out at the mountains. They looked bigger today, stronger. Well, Shalia, I said aloud to the empty room, you did it. I felt lighter. I felt like I had just lost 200 pounds of dead weight. I smiled, and this time it was a real smile. It reached all the way to my eyes. I enjoyed exactly 48 hours of silence. For 2 whole days, my phone didn't ring. No one banged on my door. I watered my plants. I read my book, and I slept through the night without waking up with that tight feeling in my chest. I almost let myself believe it was over. I almost believed that Bernard and Linda had accepted their defeat and moved on to solve their own problems. But I should have known better. A cornered animal doesn't just go to sleep. It lashes out. And since they couldn't get my money, they decided to come for the only other thing I had of value, my reputation. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen cutting up some melon for breakfast when the landline rang. It was Martha, a woman I've sat next to in the church pew for 15 years. Martha is a good woman, but she loves to talk. If news happens in Santa Fe, Martha knows it before the local paper does. Hello, Martha, I answered cheerfully. Oh, Shalia, Martha's voice sounded tight, nervous. I was just calling to check on you. How are you feeling today, dear? I'm feeling wonderful, actually. I said, why do you ask? There was a pause on the line. Well, I don't want to speak out of turn, but Bernard called me last night. He sounded very distressed. My hand tightened on the phone receiver. Distressed about what? About your health, Martha said, lowering her voice, as if she were sharing a state secret. He said you've been acting erratic. He said you were forgetting things. He told me you became confused and aggressive when he came to visit, screaming about people stealing from you. He was asking if I had noticed any signs of, well, dementia. I felt a cold flush of anger run up my neck. It was a classic move. If he couldn't legally declare me incompetent with a power of attorney, he would try to destroy my credibility socially. He was planting the seeds. If I got angry, it would look like aggression. If I forgot a name, it would look like dementia. He was trying to isolate me so that when he came back for round 2, no one would believe me. He said he's worried you're hoarding money and not taking care of yourself. Martha continued. He asked us to keep an eye on you because he thinks you're a danger to yourself. I took a deep breath. I could have yelled. I could have told Martha that my son was a liar and a thief. But getting defensive makes you look guilty. Getting angry makes you look unstable. Martha, I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. I appreciate you telling me. Bernard is going through a very difficult time right now, and I think he is projecting his stress onto me. But I assure you, I am perfectly fine. Oh, I know, Martha stammered. But he sounded so convincing. Tell you what, I said, why don't you come over for tea this afternoon? And bring Helen and Joy, too. I made those lemon squares you like. We can catch up, and you can see for yourself how I'm doing. I hung up the phone. I didn't panic. I went to the pantry and took out the flour. 3 hours later, Martha, Helen, and Joy were sitting in my living room. The house smelled of fresh lemon squares and Earl Grey tea. I used the good china, the same china Linda had mocked. I was dressed in a crisp blouse and slacks. I didn't look like a confused old woman. I looked like the head of the household. We made small talk for 20 minutes. They watched me closely, looking for slips, looking for the dementia Bernard had warned them about. They saw nothing but a sharp, attentive hostess. Finally, Helen put down her teacup. Shalia, we have to ask. Bernard said you threw them out of the house. He said you were speaking nonsense about debts. I did throw them out. I admit it quietly, and it breaks my heart to have to do it. But why? Martha asked. He's your son. Because he has a problem, I said, and I refused to fund it anymore. I reached under the coffee table and pulled out a manila envelope. I didn't bring out the financial ledger. That was private. Showing numbers is tacky, but showing behavior, that's necessary. I took out the 4 photos the private investigator had given me. I laid them on the coffee table, right next to the teapot. Bernard told you he needed money to help me. I said, he told me he needed money for a business franchise. But this is where he was last Tuesday, when he was supposed to be working. The ladies leaned in. They saw Bernard at the blackjack table. They saw the drink in his hand. They saw the timestamps. The Golden Sand Casino. Joy gasped, clutching her pearls. In our circle, gambling away your family's security is a cardinal sin. He asked me for $75,000. I told them. He wanted me to sign over my pension. When I refused and showed him these photos, he became very angry. That is why he is telling you I have dementia. He is trying to discredit me because I cut off his supply. The room went silent. The concerned friend dynamic shifted instantly. They weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at me with respect. They were looking at the photos with disgust. "Oh, Shalia," Martha said, reaching over to pat my hand. "I had no idea." He sounded so sincere. "Addicts often do," I said sadly. "I love my son, but I will not let him drag me down with him, and I certainly won't let him lie about my mental health to my friends." "Well, you don't have to worry about us," Helen said, her voice firm. "If he calls again, I'll have a few words for him." By the time they left, I knew the gossip mill would work in my favor. By tomorrow morning, the entire church group would know that Bernard wasn't a concerned son. He was a gambler trying to swindle his mother. I had neutralized his weapon without raising my voice. But I knew reputation wasn't the only thing I needed to protect. As soon as the ladies drove away, I picked up the phone again. This time, I called a local locksmith I had known for years. "Hey, Mike," I said, "I need you to come out. I need my locks changed. All of them. Front, back, and the garage side door." "Everything okay, Shalia?" he asked. "Everything is fine," I said, "just upgrading security." Mike was there within the hour. I watched him remove the old brass tumblers, the keys Bernard had carried since he was 16. I felt a twinge of sadness as I saw the metal drop into his toolbox. That key represented trust. It represented, "You are always welcome here." But trust is earned, and Bernard had spent his. "I also want one of those cameras," I told Mike, "the ones that ring to your phone." "A Ring doorbell?" Mike asked. "I can install that. You got Wi-Fi?" "I do," I said. By sunset, my house was a fortress. I had shiny new silver keys that only I possessed. I had a camera mounted by the front door with a little blue light that blinked, letting everyone know they were being watched. I sat on my sofa that evening and opened the app on my phone. I could see my front porch in clear, high-definition video. I could see the driveway. I could see the road if Bernard came back. And I had a feeling he might. Once the desperation really set in, he wouldn't be able to barge in. He wouldn't be able to surprise me. I wasn't a victim waiting for the wolf to blow the house down. I was the bricklayer who had reinforced the walls. I made myself a light dinner and ate it in the living room. The phone didn't ring. Martha must have done her job well. The smear campaign had failed. The physical threat was locked out. For the first time in years, I wasn't just safe. I was secure. And there is a big difference between the two. Safety is luck. Security is preparation. I was ready for whatever came next. The final step wasn't about locks or cameras. It was about the future. 3 days after I changed the locks, I drove to downtown Santa Fe to see Mr. Henderson. His office smelled of old paper and lemon polish, a smell that always reminded me of handling my husband's affairs years ago. This time, however, I wasn't there as a grieving widow. I was there as a woman taking control. Mr. Henderson sat behind his mahogany desk, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He had the family debt ledger and the notarized affidavit on the desk in front of him. "You are absolutely certain about this change, Shalia?" he asked, looking over the rims of his glasses. "Disinheriting a child is a significant legal step. It can be contested." "It won't be contested successfully," I said firmly. "Not with the documentation I've provided. You see the numbers, Mr. Henderson. Bernard has already received his inheritance. He just took it while I was still alive." Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. "And the beneficiary designation? You want the entire residual estate, the house, the savings, the pension remainder, to go to the Santa Fe Women's Shelter." "Yes," I said. "I want it to go to women who are trying to escape bad situations. Women who need a fresh start. I don't want my money to fund a gambling habit. I want it to fund freedom." He slid the document toward me. "Sign here, here, and here." The pen scratched against the paper. It was a loud sound in the quiet office. With every signature, I felt another chain falling off my ankles. When I put the pen down, it was done. My legacy wasn't going to be wasted. It was going to matter. A month went by. The seasons were changing. The scorching heat of the summer was giving way to the crisp, cool air of autumn. The cottonwood trees along the river were turning gold. My life had fallen into a beautiful, quiet rhythm. I joined a pottery class on Wednesdays. I had coffee with Martha and the girls on Fridays. I slept soundly. Then the letter came. I found it in the mailbox on a Tuesday. It was a plain white envelope. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Bernard's scrawl, messy, rushed, frantic. I took it inside. I didn't open it right away. I made myself a cup of tea first. I sat in my favorite chair, by the window. Then I used my letter opener to slit the top. A single sheet of lined notebook paper fell out. Mom, I know you're still mad. I know things got heated. I'm sorry if I raised my voice, but you have to understand the pressure I'm under. Linda won't stop crying. The bank is calling every day. We are really up against the wall here. I'm willing to forgive the whole private investigator thing if you're willing to be reasonable. We don't need the full 50%. Just $10,000 to get the creditors off our backs. Please, be a mother. Don't let us sink. Call me Bernard. I read it twice. I'm willing to forgive you. He had written. He was forgiving me. After trying to steal my retirement, after insulting me in my own kitchen, after calling me a stingy old hag, he was offering me forgiveness for a price. There was no, I'm sorry I lied. There was no, I'm sorry I gambled your money. There was just manipulation wrapped in a thin layer of guilt. He hadn't changed. He hadn't learned. He was still the same man who thought my love was a currency he could spend. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just felt finished. I walked over to my desk. I opened the drawer and took out a thick red permanent marker, the same red ink I had used to tally his debts in the ledger. I put the letter back in the envelope. I didn't write a reply. I didn't write a check. On the front of the envelope, right across his messy handwriting, I wrote 3 words in big, bold block letters. Return to sender. I walked back out to the mailbox, flipped the red flag up, and shut the metal door. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I pulled my suitcase out of the closet. I didn't pack for a guilt trip. I packed for a road trip. I packed my comfortable walking shoes, my favorite sweater, and a stack of maps. I had been talking about visiting Albuquerque for 5 years. I wanted to see the balloon fiesta. I wanted to eat green chili stew. I wanted to visit the museums. But I had always put it off. I was always saving money just in case Bernard needed something. I was always staying close to home in case the grandkids visited. Well, in case was over. Right now was beginning. I loaded the car. I checked the oil because, unlike my son, I take care of my vehicles. I locked the front door, checked the Ring camera one last time, and got into the driver's seat. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the house. It was still my sanctuary, but it wasn't my prison anymore. I turned onto the highway, the road stretching out before me like a gray ribbon. I turned on the radio. An old song was playing, something about wide open spaces. I realized something as the city limits of Santa Fe faded in my rearview mirror. For 40 years, I thought being a good mother meant saying, yes. I thought it meant giving until you were empty. I thought it meant sacrificing your own peace to keep the peace. But I was wrong. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and even for them is to say no. By saying no to their greed, I said yes to my dignity. By closing the bank of mom, I opened the door to the rest of my life. I am Shalia Woodard. I am 72 years old. I am debt-free. And for the first time in a long time, I am driving my own car on my own gas toward my own destination. And the view from here is absolutely beautiful. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.